At 12 years old, he wasn't the feared heir to Korea's most powerful underground empire. He was just a frightened boy running through a cold forest with tears blurring his vision. His expensive clothes were torn, his knees were bleeding, and every sound behind him made his heart race faster. He had escaped the men chasing him, but he had no strength left. Just as his body gave in and he collapsed beneath an old maple tree, someone gently touched his shoulder. When he opened his eyes, he expected another enemy. Instead, he saw a young black girl with kind eyes filled with concern instead of fear. She smiled as though she had known him forever. That single smile would become the memory he carried for the rest of his life. Before they were separated, she tied a handmade bracelet around his wrist and whispered softly, "One day, when you're strong enough, don't forget the people who loved you before the world knew your name." He promised he never would. But when he returned to find her only days later, she had disappeared without a trace. If you love Korean billionaire romance and mafia love stories like this, subscribe now to @Physial_Threads and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. For nearly 2 decades, that promise remained alive in one man's heart. While the world knew him as Kang Min-jae, the cold and untouchable chairman of the Hanseong Group and the silent leader of Korea's most influential family, there was one secret he had never shared with anyone. Every year on the same autumn morning, he opened a small wooden box hidden inside his private study. Inside rested an old handmade bracelet woven from faded blue and brown threads. Time had worn away its bright colors, but he had preserved it with extraordinary care. His assistants believed it was an expensive antique. His security team assumed it was a family heirloom. Even his closest advisors had never questioned why their intimidating chairman would quietly stare at such a simple bracelet for several minutes before beginning work. None of them knew that it had once been tied around the wrist of a lonely 12-year-old boy by the only person who had ever cared for him without expecting anything in return. As Min-jae looked out through the massive glass windows overlooking Seoul, memories quietly surfaced. He remembered waking inside a tiny wooden house with the smell of herbs filling the room. He remembered soft hands changing the bandages on his scraped arms. He remembered laughter echoing through the fields as she insisted he should stop acting brave and simply admit he was scared. Back then, he hadn't told her who he really was. To her, he was simply a lost boy who needed help. And somehow, that made him happier than being treated like the son of the most feared family in Korea. But life had different plans. His father had found him only days later after searching relentlessly. When Min-jae begged to return and thank the girl properly, his father agreed. Yet when they reached the little village, the small wooden house stood empty. The family had already left. No forwarding address. No relatives nearby. No clues. Only silence. For years afterward, Min-jae quietly searched. Private investigators traveled across Korea and several neighboring countries. His business network looked through immigration records, schools, churches, charities, and villages. He searched using the only details he remembered: a bright smile, gentle eyes, a handmade bracelet, and the words she had spoken beneath the maple tree. But every search ended the same way. Nothing. Meanwhile, thousands of kilometers away, another life unfolded with far less luxury. The young girl had grown into a graceful woman named Naya. Originally from Kenya, her parents had moved frequently for humanitarian work before eventually settling in Korea during her teenage years. Growing up in different communities taught her compassion long before she understood success. Although life had never been easy financially, Naya never complained. She worked several part-time jobs while earning scholarships to complete her education. After graduation, she devoted much of her free time to volunteering at community centers, helping immigrant families adjust to life in Korea. Whenever someone thanked her, she simply smiled. "My parents taught me that kindness is the only wealth that grows when you give it away." Those words guided every decision she made. Yet there was one memory she had quietly buried. Many years ago, she had cared for an injured boy whose real name she never learned. Sometimes she wondered whether he had returned safely. Sometimes she wondered if he even remembered her. But as adulthood arrived, she accepted that childhood promises rarely survived reality. Surely he had forgotten. After all, powerful people always moved forward. Ordinary people stayed behind. One chilly Monday morning, Naya adjusted the sleeves of her neatly pressed cream-colored blouse as she stood outside the towering headquarters of Hanseong Group. The building seemed almost unreal. Its glass walls reflected the morning sun like polished diamonds. Luxury cars arrived one after another. Executives walked confidently through the revolving doors. She inhaled slowly. This interview mattered more than any she had ever attended. After months of searching, this was her chance to secure stable employment with one of Korea's most respected corporations. Little did she know, the owner of that building had spent half his life searching for her. Inside the executive conference room, Min Jae was already reviewing reports. His vice president entered cautiously. Chairman Kong, the Human Resources Department has finalized today's final interview candidates. I wasn't supposed to attend. They've requested your approval. One position involves our international outreach division. Min Jae sighed quietly. Normally, he avoided interviews. They wasted valuable time. Yet something made him pause. Perhaps it was boredom. Perhaps instinct. Fine. Minutes later, the candidates were escorted into the conference hall. One by one they introduced themselves. Min Jae barely looked up from their files. Their answers sounded rehearsed. Predictable. Forgettable. Until the final applicant entered. Good morning. Her voice was calm. Warm. Different. Min Jae finally lifted his eyes. Time itself seemed to hesitate. For reasons he couldn't explain, his heartbeat changed. The young woman standing before him looked strangely familiar. Not because he recognized her face, but because her smile stirred something buried deep within his memories. Naya bowed respectfully. My name is Naya Akying. She introduced herself with quiet confidence. Unlike the other candidates, she didn't boast about achievements. Instead, she spoke about helping communities understand one another. She described leadership as service instead of authority. She believed businesses should improve lives, not merely generate profit. Several executives exchanged skeptical glances. One whispered that she sounded too idealistic. Min Jae remained silent. Every word she spoke felt oddly comforting, as though he had heard that gentle sincerity before. He couldn't understand why. After the interviews ended, the directors immediately began discussing the results. Candidate number 4 has stronger corporate experience. I agree. The last applicant lacks executive exposure. Another executive nodded. She isn't suitable for Hanseong. Min Jae quietly closed the files. I disagree. Silence filled the room. The directors exchanged nervous looks. He rarely challenged their recommendations. Chairman, hire Miss Naya. No one dared argue. Outside, Naya was preparing herself for another rejection. When the HR manager approached with a smile, she looked surprised. Congratulations. I got the job. Yes. She blinked several times. Thank you. As she left the building, she looked up at the skyscraper once more. She had no idea that one decision had just changed 2 lives forever. Over the following weeks, Naya quickly earned the respect of her colleagues. She treated every employee equally, from senior executives to cleaning staff. She remembered birthdays. She stayed late to help struggling coworkers. She even learned phrases from different languages so international visitors would feel welcome. People naturally felt comfortable around her. Even those known for difficult personalities found themselves smiling after speaking with her. There was one exception. Chairman Kong remained distant. Professional. Unreadable. Whenever they crossed paths, he simply nodded politely before continuing his day. Still, something strange kept happening. Whenever Naya laughed in the hallway, Min Jae unconsciously looked toward the sound. Whenever she spoke during meetings, he found himself paying closer attention than intended. Whenever she smiled, an old memory tugged gently at his heart. He couldn't explain it. Meanwhile, Naya also noticed something unusual. Behind Chairman Kang's intimidating reputation, she occasionally caught glimpses of quiet sadness in his eyes. Not arrogance. Not cruelty. Loneliness. It reminded her of someone she had once known long ago. One rainy evening, after most employees had gone home, Naya remained in the office organizing documents for an international charity partnership. The lights flickered softly as thunder echoed outside. Without realizing it, she began humming an old melody her mother used to sing. Across the hallway, Min Jae froze. His pen slipped from his fingers. That song. His breathing slowed. He hadn't heard those notes in nearly 20 years. It was the same lullaby the little girl had softly hummed while changing the bandages on his injured hands inside that tiny wooden house. His heart pounded against his chest. Impossible. How could she know that song? He slowly walked toward the partially opened office door. Inside, Naya continued humming, completely unaware that someone was standing outside, listening with eyes filled with disbelief. And as Min Jae stared at her, the faded bracelet resting inside his study suddenly seemed far less like a memory, and far more like the beginning of a miracle. The melody lingered in the quiet hallway long after Naya stopped humming. For a brief moment, Kang Min Jae forgot where he was. The polished marble floors, the towering glass walls, the endless responsibilities waiting on his desk, all faded away. In their place stood a tiny wooden cottage surrounded by wildflowers, where a little girl had once smiled at a frightened boy as though he mattered more than the world outside. His hand instinctively reached for the silver watch on his wrist, a habit he had developed whenever emotions threatened the calm image everyone expected from him. No, he whispered to himself. It can't be. There were thousands of people who knew old lullabies. Thousands who smiled with kindness. Thousands who reminded him of the past. He couldn't allow hope to cloud his judgment again. Hope had disappointed him too many times. Without another word, he quietly turned and walked back toward his office. But for the first time in years, his carefully controlled heart had begun beating for a memory that suddenly felt alive. Meanwhile, Naya finished arranging the documents and stretched her tired shoulders. She had no idea someone had been standing outside moments earlier. As she looked through the rain-covered windows, she smiled to herself. I hope tomorrow is sunny. Simple thoughts like that kept her grounded. She never dreamed of becoming wealthy. She never chased luxury. She only wanted enough peace to live honestly and enough opportunity to help the people around her. It was that quiet contentment that unknowingly drew people toward her. The following morning, the company buzzed with unusual excitement. Chairman Kang had announced an upcoming international charity initiative, one designed to provide educational opportunities for immigrant children throughout Korea. Every department would contribute, but one employee would coordinate the project directly with him. When the announcement reached Naya's department, her manager smiled. Congratulations. She looked confused. For what? The chairman personally requested you. The entire office fell silent. Several employees stared in disbelief. Some smiled politely. Others weren't nearly as welcoming. She just joined the company. Why would the chairman choose her? There are people with 10 years of experience here. The whispers spread quickly. Naya lowered her eyes. I don't want anyone to think I'm taking someone else's place. Her manager shook his head. This wasn't our decision. It came directly from the chairman. Across the executive floor, Min Jae stood before the large windows overlooking Seoul. His assistant entered. Chairman, are you certain? I am. You've never worked this closely with a new employee. Min Jae remained silent for several seconds. I need someone who understands people. His assistant nodded respectfully. But privately, he knew there was another reason. The chairman simply hadn't admitted it yet. Later that afternoon, Naya entered the executive conference room, carrying her notebook. She expected dozens of executives. Instead, only Min Jae was waiting. The room suddenly felt much larger than before. She bowed respectfully. You asked to see me, Chairman. He motioned toward the chair across from him. Please sit. His voice remained calm, but noticeably softer than during company meetings. She sat carefully. He studied the project proposal before speaking. I've reviewed your volunteer history. She looked surprised. You have. You've worked with refugee families, children's centers, and language programs. Yes. Why? She blinked. It was an unusual interview question. My parents believed kindness should be practical. He looked up. What does that mean? She smiled gently. It means compassion isn't something you feel. It's something you do. The answer lingered in the room. Min Jae couldn't explain why those words felt so familiar. They carried the same warmth he remembered from years ago. Almost unconsciously, he smiled. It was barely noticeable. Yet for someone who rarely smiled at all, it felt extraordinary. Naya noticed. So did his assistant standing outside through the glass wall. The entire executive floor seemed frozen. Did the chairman just smile? No. I think he actually did. News traveled through the company before lunch ended. Employees who had worked there for years couldn't remember the last time anyone had made Chairman Kang smile. But what neither they nor Naya knew was that Min Jae wasn't smiling because of the conversation. He was smiling because, for the first time in nearly 20 years, his heart felt strangely peaceful. Over the next several weeks, they worked together almost every day. Meetings turned into discussions. Discussions became conversations. Conversations slowly became moments neither of them expected. Min Jae discovered that Naya never entered a room without greeting everyone first. She remembered the security guards by name. She thanked the cafeteria staff every afternoon. When one elderly janitor accidentally dropped cleaning supplies across the lobby, several employees walked past without stopping. Naya immediately knelt beside him. "It's okay. I'll help." She carefully gathered every bottle and cloth before making sure he wasn't hurt. Watching from the upper floor balcony, Min Jae quietly observed everything. No cameras were nearby. No executives were watching. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply kind. Exactly as she had been all those years ago. That evening, as the company prepared to close, Min Jae unexpectedly found himself walking through the lobby. The elderly janitor bowed deeply. "Chairman." Min Jae looked toward him. "How long has Miss Naya been helping you?" The old man smiled warmly. "Since her first week. Every evening. She says no one should end a hard day's work alone." Min Jae remained silent. His chest tightened. Those words. They sounded exactly like something the little girl from his childhood would have said. Meanwhile, Naya continued living as though nothing extraordinary was happening. She still took the subway instead of expensive taxis. She still called her elderly neighbors every weekend to check on them. She still volunteered every Saturday morning. One weekend, while delivering donated books to a community center, she unexpectedly saw a familiar black luxury sedan parked outside. She frowned. "Chairman Kong." Before she could leave unnoticed, Min Jae stepped out carrying several large boxes himself. She hurried over. "You shouldn't carry those." He looked amused. "Why?" "Because you're the chairman." And she laughed. "People will think the company is in trouble." A faint chuckle escaped him. "They're books, not gold." Together they carried supplies into the center. The children immediately surrounded Naya with excited laughter. "Miss Naya, you came back." She knelt beside them effortlessly. "I promised I would." Min Jae watched quietly. One little boy ran toward him before stopping nervously. "Are you scary?" Several volunteers gasped. Naya tried to apologize. "I'm so sorry." But Min Jae raised his hand. "It's all right." He crouched until he was eye level with the child. "What do you think?" The boy studied him seriously. "You look scary." A long silence followed. Then, Min Jae smiled. "Sometimes I think so too." The children burst into laughter. Within minutes they were asking him questions, pulling him toward puzzles, drawing pictures, and inviting him into games. Naya couldn't stop smiling. She had never imagined the cold chairman surrounded by children, patiently helping them color paper cranes. For the first time, she saw the little boy still hidden inside the powerful man. As the afternoon ended, they walked through a nearby park beneath rows of blooming cherry trees. Neither spoke for several minutes. The silence wasn't awkward. It was comforting. Finally, Min Jae asked quietly, "Do you ever regret choosing such a simple life?" She looked at him. "What do you mean? You could earn much more elsewhere." She smiled. "My mother used to say that peace is expensive." He looked confused. "I don't understand." "People spend their whole lives chasing money." She looked toward the setting sun. "But peace. Peace comes from knowing who you are." He absorbed every word. His world had always revolved around influence, negotiations, responsibility, and power. Yet somehow, the woman walking beside him possessed something he had never been able to buy: contentment. As weeks became months, the walls around Min Jae's heart slowly began to crumble. Employees noticed subtle changes. The chairman now greeted staff members. He occasionally joined lunch meetings. He even approved larger budgets for community programs after hearing Naya's ideas. People joked that the company itself seemed warmer. Of course, not everyone appreciated the change. Among the senior executives was Director Seo Ji-hoon, a man who had spent years trying to gain Min Jae's complete trust. He noticed every glance the chairman directed toward Naya. Every meeting extended longer than necessary. Every rare smile. One evening, he approached another executive. "This isn't good." "What isn't?" "The chairman is becoming distracted." "By an employee?" Ji-hoon nodded. "Someone needs to remind him who he is." Meanwhile, neither Min Jae nor Naya realized that their growing friendship had already attracted unwanted attention. One rainy evening, after another successful charity meeting, Min Jae offered to drive Naya home. She hesitated. "I usually take the subway." "It's raining." "I don't mind." "I do." She smiled politely before accepting. As the car moved quietly through Seoul's glowing streets, neither noticed the black sedan following several vehicles behind. Inside sat Director Seo Ji-hoon. His expression was unreadable. "So, He murmured quietly. This is becoming serious. Back inside the car, soft music filled the silence. Naya looked out the rain-covered window. You know, she smiled. You don't seem nearly as cold as people say. Min Jae glanced at her. And what do they say? That you're impossible to understand. He looked ahead again. Maybe they're right. She shook her head gently. I don't think so. I think. She paused. You're someone who's been lonely for a very long time. Those words struck him harder than she could ever imagine. Because no one, not even his closest advisors, had ever truly seen through him. And somewhere deep inside his heart, a forgotten memory stirred once more, of a little girl who had once looked at an injured boy and understood his pain without asking a single question. As the car disappeared into the rainy night, neither of them realized that fate was quietly weaving together the threads of a promise made 20 years earlier. But someone else had already decided that if Naya continued getting closer to Chairman Kong, she would have to leave the company. And this quiet decision would soon test a love that neither of them had fully recognized yet. Months passed, and what had begun as a simple working relationship slowly became something neither Kong Min Jae nor Naya could explain. They still addressed each other professionally inside the company. She still bowed respectfully whenever they met in the office corridors. He still maintained the composed expression that had earned him the reputation of being Korea's most intimidating chairman. But behind those formal greetings, something beautiful was quietly taking root. Every morning, Min Jae found himself looking toward the elevator a few seconds longer than necessary, wondering whether she had arrived. Every evening, Naya noticed that no matter how busy his schedule became, he somehow remembered to ask if she had eaten dinner. Neither of them called it affection, yet everyone around them could see it. One crisp autumn morning, Hanseong Group organized a charity festival at a cultural center outside Seoul. The event brought together children from immigrant families, local volunteers, artists, and educators. It wasn't about publicity. Thanks to Naya's planning, it was designed to make every child feel seen and welcomed. The large courtyard was filled with laughter. Children painted colorful murals. Families shared homemade meals from different countries. Traditional Korean music blended beautifully with African drum performances, creating an atmosphere that celebrated unity rather than differences. Watching everything from a short distance away, Min Jae couldn't hide the quiet pride in his eyes. This was your idea, he said. Naya smiled. No, it was everyone's idea. I just connected people. He looked around. You always say that. Because it's true. She turned toward him. No one changes the world alone. Those words stayed with him long after the conversation ended. As the afternoon continued, the children gathered around a craft table where volunteers taught them how to weave friendship bracelets using colorful threads. Naya immediately joined them. She laughed as little hands struggled to tie tiny knots. Patiently, she demonstrated each step. This loop goes here. Now pull gently. One little girl frowned. I can't do it. Naya smiled warmly. You can. My mother used to tell me every bracelet carries a promise. The moment she said those words, Min Jae froze. His breathing became uneven. A promise. Bracelets. His heart suddenly beat louder than the music surrounding them. He slowly walked closer without saying anything. Naya continued helping the children. When I was little, she said softly, I made one for a boy who got hurt. The thread slipped from her fingers as memories unexpectedly surfaced. I hope. She smiled sadly. I hope he's doing well. Min Jae felt the ground disappear beneath him. His chest tightened. His hands trembled ever so slightly. He wanted to ask. He wanted to know. But fear stopped him. Fear that this was another coincidence. Fear that hope would break him again. Instead, he quietly walked away before anyone noticed the storm building inside him. That evening, after returning home, Min Jae unlocked the small wooden box inside his study. He carefully lifted the faded bracelet. The blue thread. The brown knot. The tiny, uneven pattern only a child's hands could create. He remembered every detail. For years, this bracelet had been nothing more than a memory. Now, it suddenly felt like evidence. He closed his eyes. Could it really be her? Meanwhile, across the city, Naya sat inside her modest apartment looking through an old storage box she hadn't opened in years. Inside were childhood photographs, letters from her parents, dried flowers, and another bracelet, almost identical to the one she had tied around the injured boy's wrist years ago. She gently ran her fingers across it. I wonder who you became. She smiled. You probably forgot all about that silly promise. She placed the bracelet back into the box, completely unaware. The boy had never forgotten. The following week, Hanseon Group prepared for its annual Founders Gala, an elegant evening attended by business leaders, diplomats, and charitable organizations. Every department was expected to attend. Naya almost declined. She disliked formal events. But her manager insisted. It's important. You helped organize most of this year's charity projects. You deserve to be there. Reluctantly, she agreed. On the evening of the gala, the grand ballroom sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers. Elegant music floated through the air. Guests in luxurious gowns and tailored suits filled the room. When Naya entered wearing a simple emerald green dress, conversations briefly paused. She wasn't dressed extravagantly. She didn't wear expensive jewelry. Yet there was something graceful about her quiet confidence that naturally drew attention. Min-jae noticed her immediately. For a moment, the entire room disappeared. His assistant quietly smiled. You've been looking toward the entrance for 20 minutes. Min-jae cleared his throat. I was waiting for the guests. Of course. His assistant hid a grin. Throughout the evening, executives approached Min-jae with business proposals. Investors requested photographs. Media representatives sought interviews. Yet his eyes repeatedly searched the ballroom until they found Naya speaking with volunteers and scholarship recipients. She seemed completely at ease with ordinary people, exactly as she always had been. Later that evening, the host announced a charity auction featuring handmade crafts created by children from immigrant communities. Among the displayed items, Min-jae noticed something that instantly stole his breath. A small woven bracelet, blue and brown threads, the exact same design. He walked toward it almost instinctively. Naya arrived moments later. She smiled. The children asked me to teach them. His voice became unusually quiet. Who taught you? She looked at the bracelet. My mother. She said handmade promises last longer than expensive gifts. He stared at the bracelet without blinking. My mother believed that too. Naya looked surprised. Really? He nodded slowly. Then, very carefully, he reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. From a protective leather case, he removed the old bracelet he had carried for nearly 20 years. Naya's eyes widened. The color had faded. The threads had aged. But the pattern, she knew it instantly. Her lips parted. No. Her voice barely escaped. It can't be. Min-jae looked directly into her eyes. I've searched for you. His voice cracked for the first time in years. For 19 years. Silence surrounded them. The ballroom faded into the background. Only the two of them remained. Naya gently reached toward the bracelet with trembling fingers. I made this, she whispered. For a frightened boy who wouldn't stop pretending he wasn't scared. Tears filled Min-jae's eyes. And you told him. His voice shook. Never to forget the people who loved him before the world knew his name. Naya covered her mouth. Tears streamed freely down her cheeks. You remembered. I remembered every word. Without caring who was watching, Min-jae stepped forward and embraced her. For the first time since childhood, the promise beneath the maple tree had found its way home. Around them, guests watched in stunned silence. No one had ever seen the emotionless Chairman Kong cry. But tonight, he made no attempt to hide his tears. I thought. Naya whispered through her sobs. You forgot. I tried to find you. Every year. I never stopped. She smiled through tears. I searched too. I just didn't know where to look. The reunion touched everyone who witnessed it. Everyone. Except one man. Standing across the ballroom, Director Ji Hoon watched with narrowed eyes. Everything suddenly made sense. The chairman wasn't simply interested in Naya. She was the woman connected to the only weakness he had ever carried. Ji-hoon quietly left the ballroom. The next morning, rumors spread through every floor of Hanseon Group. Some employees celebrated. Others admired the beautiful story. But members of the powerful Kong family were less enthusiastic. During a private family meeting, one elderly relative frowned. A chairman cannot marry an ordinary woman. She has no powerful family, no corporate influence, no social standing. Another nodded. Our reputation will suffer. Min-jae calmly placed the bracelet on the conference table. The room became silent. You measure people by status. He looked at each of them. I measure them by character. No one spoke. When I had nothing, he continued quietly. Before titles, before wealth, before influence. She chose kindness. He picked up the bracelet again. That is worth more than every company we own. His words echoed throughout the room. Several family members lowered their eyes. For the first time, they understood why no arranged marriage had ever interested him. His heart had never been empty. It had simply been waiting. Meanwhile, Naya struggled with unexpected attention. News articles praised her. Social media discussed her background. Some celebrated their love story. Others questioned whether she belonged beside one of Korea's most powerful men. One evening, she stood alone on the rooftop garden of Hanseong headquarters, quietly looking over the city lights. She wondered whether loving Min Jae would cost him more than she could bear. Moments later, she heard familiar footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around. She already knew who it was, and what she was about to say could change both of their lives forever. Naya stood quietly beneath the evening sky, the cool breeze gently moving her hair as she looked over the countless lights stretching across Seoul. From the rooftop garden of Hanseong Group, the city looked peaceful, almost as though it knew nothing about the storm inside her heart. For several minutes, she simply listened to the sound of footsteps approaching behind her. She didn't have to turn around. Only one person walked with that calm, unhurried confidence. Min Jae stopped beside her. Neither of them spoke immediately. Sometimes silence said far more than words ever could. Finally, Naya smiled softly. The city is beautiful at night. It is. But tonight, she looked down at her hands. I don't know if my heart feels as peaceful as these lights. Min Jae studied her expression carefully. You've been avoiding me all day. I know. Why? She took a slow breath before finally gathering the courage to say what had been weighing on her heart. Because I'm afraid. He frowned slightly. Afraid of me? She immediately shook her head. Never. I'm afraid of what people are saying. She looked into his eyes. They're questioning your judgment. They're criticizing your family. They're saying you'll lose respect because of me. She forced a smile that couldn't quite hide the sadness behind it. I don't want the person I've waited my whole life to find to lose everything because he found me. For a long moment, Min Jae remained completely silent. Then he slowly reached into his jacket. Naya's eyes widened as he pulled out the faded bracelet once again. He carefully placed it in her hands. When I was 12, he said quietly, I thought strength meant never crying. She looked at him. You taught me something different. He smiled gently. You taught me that real strength is remembering kindness when the world teaches you to become cold. He took another step closer. You saved my life once. His voice softened. And for 19 years, you've continued saving it without even knowing. A tear rolled down Naya's cheek. He gently wiped it away. I've spent my entire adult life building companies, expanding businesses, protecting my family's legacy. But none of those achievements ever made me feel complete. He smiled. You did. Naya lowered her head as tears quietly fell. I don't deserve someone like you. Min Jae softly shook his head. No, I don't deserve someone like you. You loved a frightened boy before anyone called him Chairman Kong. You saw value in me before I had money, before I had power, before anyone admired my name. He gently held both of her hands. If the entire world asked me to choose between my reputation and the woman who kept her childhood promise, I would choose you every single time. For the first time since they had reunited, Naya allowed herself to believe him completely. She smiled through tears. So, she laughed softly. You finally kept your promise. He smiled back. I was just a little late. They both laughed. It was the kind of laughter that comes only after years of waiting. The kind that heals old wounds without needing to erase them. Meanwhile, news of their relationship continued spreading across Korea. Television programs discussed their remarkable reunion. Business magazines called it the most unexpected love story of the decade. Many admired their journey. Others remained skeptical. Yet something unexpected began happening. The more people learned about Naya, the harder it became to criticize her. Journalists discovered years of volunteer work. Families shared stories about how she had quietly paid school fees for children without asking for recognition. Community leaders spoke about her kindness. Former co-workers described her humility. No scandal surfaced. No hidden ambition emerged. Only kindness. Even members of the Kong family gradually began questioning their own assumptions. One afternoon, Min Jae's grandmother requested a private meeting with Naya. Many expected tension. Instead, the elderly woman welcomed her into the family garden, where hundreds of white camellias bloomed beautifully. She poured tea herself. Naya bowed respectfully. Thank you for meeting with me. The elderly woman smiled. I wanted to meet the young woman who made my grandson smile again. Naya looked surprised. He smiles more now. I noticed. The grandmother took a thoughtful sip of tea. When Min Jae was a little boy, he laughed often. After that terrible incident, he almost never smiled again. She reached across the table and gently held Naya's hand. But since you returned, I've seen my grandson become himself again. She smiled warmly. That matters more than family status. Tears filled Naya's eyes. Thank you. The elderly woman chuckled softly. No, I should thank you. You brought our family back the little boy we thought we'd lost forever. Word of the grandmother's approval quickly spread throughout the family. One by one, those who had opposed the relationship quietly withdrew their objections. Not because Min Jae demanded it, but because Naya's character spoke louder than their prejudice. Several months later, Min Jae invited Naya to the same countryside village where they had first met as children. The village had changed over the years. New homes had been built. The roads were wider. But the old maple tree still stood proudly at the edge of the field. They walked toward it together. Neither spoke. When they finally reached the tree, Min Jae gently touched its rough bark. This is where everything began. Naya smiled. I remember thinking you looked so stubborn. He laughed. I was terrified. I know. You pretended to be brave. You saw through me immediately. She nodded. You were never good at hiding your feelings. He looked at her playfully. I became better. She raised an eyebrow. Not really. They both laughed again. Min Jae reached into his pocket. This time, instead of an old bracelet, he held a small velvet box. Naya looked at him with surprised eyes. He slowly knelt beneath the same maple tree where they had first met. The autumn leaves danced gently around them. His voice trembled ever so slightly. Years ago, a little girl told a frightened boy never to forget the people who loved him before the world knew his name. He smiled. I never forgot. He opened the box. Inside rested a delicate engagement ring. Naya, you were my first safe place. My first friend. My greatest memory. And now, I want you to become every tomorrow I'll ever have. He looked into her tear-filled eyes. Will you marry me? Before he even finished speaking, Naya nodded repeatedly. Yes. Yes. 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger. She immediately wrapped her arms around him. For several moments, neither of them said anything. Words simply weren't enough. Their wedding took place 6 months later in a beautiful garden overlooking the mountains. It wasn't the extravagant event many expected from one of Korea's wealthiest families. Instead, it reflected exactly who they were. Children from the community center carried flowers down the aisle. The elderly janitor from Hanseong Group attended as an honored guest. Former volunteers, teachers, employees, and neighbors filled the seats alongside business leaders. No one was seated according to wealth, only according to love. As Naya walked toward Min Jae beneath thousands of white blossoms, he couldn't hold back his tears. His assistant quietly whispered to another executive. I've worked for him 15 years. I've never seen him cry this much. The executive smiled. Maybe those aren't tears. Maybe that's 19 years of waiting finally ending. Everyone applauded as they exchanged their vows. When the ceremony ended, the children surrounded them, laughing as flower petals filled the air. Years passed. Their home became known not for luxury, but for warmth. Although Min Jae remained one of Korea's most respected business leaders, people noticed something different. He no longer measured success only through profits. Under his leadership, Hanseong Group expanded scholarship programs, community centers, healthcare initiatives, and international education partnerships. Whenever reporters asked what inspired these changes, he always gave the same answer. I learned long ago that one act of kindness can change someone's entire future. Naya continued leading charitable projects across the country, but she never sought recognition. To her, nothing had truly changed. She was still the same girl who believed kindness should be practical. A few years later, on a peaceful autumn afternoon, they returned once again to the old maple tree. This time, they weren't alone. Running ahead of them were their 2 young children, laughing as they chased colorful leaves across the field. Their daughter stopped beneath the tree and looked up. Dad, why do we always come here? Min Jae smiled as he looked at Naya. Then he knelt beside his children. Because this is where I learned that the strongest people aren't the richest. They're the kindest. Their son looked confused. Did something special happen here? Min Jae smiled warmly. The most important day of my life. Naya slipped her hand into his. He gently squeezed it. Even after all those years, he still wore the faded bracelet beneath his watch. And tucked safely inside a small wooden box at home rested another bracelet. The matching one Naya had kept all those years. Two simple pieces of woven thread. Worthless to the world. Priceless to the two people whose lives they had quietly connected forever. Some love stories begin with grand gestures. Others begin with destiny. But theirs began with something much simpler. A frightened little boy. A compassionate little girl. And one promise beneath a maple tree that neither of them ever truly forgot. Their story became a reminder that love isn't built on status, wealth, or influence. The strongest relationships are often rooted in kindness shown when there is nothing to gain. Trust grows through consistency. Healing comes through compassion, and loyalty is proven by the promises we continue to keep long after the world has changed around us. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness becomes the beginning of a lifetime of happiness. If you made it this far, let us know where you're watching from, and comment your favorite moment below, like this video, and subscribe to @Physial_Threads for more emotional Mafia love stories.